The mill is no longer yours to command. Before 300 workers, Duke Benedict Harrow removed the ironmaster key from his wife's hand and placed it in the palm of his cousin, Percival Crane. The spinning hall fell completely still. Wool dust drifted through shafts of afternoon light, settling over the silent looms, and the rows of workers gathered for the quarterly wage assembly. Elderly spinners stood beside apprentices barely old enough to reach the machinery. Mothers held their wage tokens tightly, while overseers stared at the floor, rather than witness what their duke had chosen to do. Lydia Harrow looked first at the key, then at her husband. For 5 years, she had carried it at her waist. When Harrowgate had been close to bankruptcy, Benedict had asked her to examine its accounts. She had discovered hidden debts, dismissed 2 dishonest suppliers, redesigned an unreliable shuttle mechanism, and secured a War Office contract that kept 6 neighboring villages employed. Last winter, Benedict had praised her in this same hall. Now he had summoned the workers to watch him humiliate her. Percival closed his fingers around the key. Triumph flickered across his narrow face before he lowered his eyes in practiced modesty. Benedict did not appear to notice. The accounts reveal concealed losses, inflated repair expenses, and wages paid to workers who do not exist, he announced. Until a full audit is completed, Mr. Crane will assume control of Harrowgate Mill. A murmur moved through the crowd. Lydia kept her voice calm. Which accounts? Percival lifted a thick leather ledger from the table. These, Your Grace. That is not one of my books. Your initials appear on every monthly balance. Then place it before me. Lydia stepped toward the table. Benedict immediately covered the open page with his hand. The gesture wounded her more deeply than the accusation. He had not brought her here to investigate a discrepancy. He had already decided that she was guilty, or that humiliating her was worth the possibility that she might be innocent. Move your hand, Lydia said quietly. His jaw tightened. You have had 5 years to examine your own records. Those are not my records. They bear your initials. An imitation of my initials is not evidence. Percival gave a restrained sigh. Every guilty steward claims the same once the losses are discovered. Several workers shifted angrily. Lydia looked only at Benedict. Do you believe I stole from Harrowgate? Do you believe I stole from Harrowgate? For one brief moment, uncertainty disturbed his expression. He could still have stopped the assembly. He could have ordered the doors closed, summoned Lydia's clerk, and compared the ledger with the original expense slips. He could have remembered the nights she had spent beside him, calculating how to keep the mill open. Instead, his eyes moved toward the workers. Lydia understood what had hardened him. They trusted her judgment. Merchants addressed their questions to her. When a loom failed, the engineers sought her approval. Benedict had begun to see every sign of their respect as proof that his authority was diminishing. I believe, he said, that no wife should make her husband a stranger within his own estate. A deeper silence followed. The accusation was no longer about money. Lydia saw Percival's satisfaction and knew he had been feeding Benedict's resentment for months. Yet Percival could only exploit what was already there. Benedict had chosen his pride long before he chose the evidence. What happens now? She asked. You will surrender every key, account book, invoice, and item of business correspondence. Your quarterly allowance will be withheld until the missing sums are recovered. Lydia's composure almost broke. Her allowance was protected under their marriage settlement. It funded the mill infirmary and the schoolroom where nearly 60 workers' children learned to read. You know what that money supports. The mill cannot finance your charitable displays while its accounts are failing. Mrs. Webb, a gray-haired spinner who had served the Harrow family for 30 years, stepped out of the crowd. Your Grace, the Duchess has never taken a penny from us. Percival's expression sharpened. Return to your place. She remained at the infirmary for 3 nights when the fever came. Mr. Crane did not enter at once. Enough, Benedict ordered. Mrs. Webb bowed, but Lydia saw anger spreading through the hall. One word from her could have turned the workers against Benedict. Percival was waiting for it. A rebellion would allow him to call her dangerous as well as dishonest. Lydia faced the workers. No one will disobey the Duke on my behalf. You will complete today's orders and protect the contract your families depend upon. She turned toward the table once more. Beneath Benedict's hand, only a few lines of the ledger remained visible. The ink was unusually dark, with a faint blue metallic sheen. Lydia's pulse changed. Who prepared those entries? My clerk copied them from your expense slips, Percival replied. That is not what I asked. He closed the ledger, but not before Lydia saw a repair charge dated the previous October. Open it again. The audit will determine whether... The Harrowgate office used oak gall ink until March, Lydia interrupted. That page was written with an ink containing Prussian blue. Benedict frowned. What difference does that make? That ink was not delivered to this estate until 3 weeks ago. Percival's face changed. Only for a heartbeat, but Lydia saw it. The entry you showed these workers claims to have been written last autumn, she continued. It could not have existed then. Percival pressed the ledger against his chest. A desperate technicality. It is proof that someone altered the accounts, or proof that your clerk recopied a damaged page. Then summon him. Bring my original expense slips and allow me to compare them. Every worker waited for Benedict's answer. Doubt had entered his eyes. Lydia could see that he understood the contradiction. But admitting it now would mean acknowledging that he had condemned his wife publicly without first asking the most basic question. His pride made the choice for him. The independent auditor will examine it. After Percival controls every document, this assembly is finished. Benedict signaled to the estate constable. Lydia did not resist as she was escorted toward the doors. She passed Mrs. Webb, young Daniel Holt, and the engineers who had worked beside her through the previous winter. No one spoke. Then Mrs. Webb removed her hands from her loom. The machine slowed to a stop. A second spinner did the same. Then a third. By the time Lydia reached the outer yard, the silence was spreading from one end of the building to the other. Loom after loom ceased moving until the vast hall stood motionless behind her. Percival possessed the master key, but Lydia still held the workers' trust. At midnight, she saw them leaving from her bedroom window. Hundreds moved down the estate road carrying bundles, tools, and sleeping children. No one shouted. No one damaged the mill. They simply abandoned the man Benedict had appointed over them. Not one worker turned toward Harrow Hall. Shortly after 1 o'clock, the mill bell rang. Once. Lydia was already pulling on her boots when someone struck her door. Mrs. Webb stood outside, breathless and blackened with soot. In one hand, she held a strip of scorched military wool. "The warehouse is burning," she said, "and Daniel says Mr. Crane locked the night watchman inside." Lydia reached the mill yard with Mrs. Webb moments later. Flames ran beneath the warehouse roof, feeding on dry wool, timber, and lamp oil. Workers had returned from the road and were forming a line between the well and the burning building. But the main doors would not open. Daniel Holt lay against the wall, coughing violently. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. "2 men are still inside," he gasped. "Mr. Crane sent us to inspect a damaged crate. Someone barred the doors after we entered." "How did you escape?" Lydia asked. "Through the weighing hatch." She examined the warehouse. Men were striking the loading doors with an iron bar, but those doors opened inward. If the watchman had collapsed behind them, forcing the entrance could crush them. "Stop!" she shouted. "Use the weighing room window. The passage behind it leads to the eastern storage aisle." The workers obeyed without hesitation. A horse entered the yard at speed. Benedict dismounted before it had fully stopped. "What happened?" "Percival locked men inside the warehouse," Mrs. Webb said. Benedict looked toward the flames. "Where is he?" "There." Percival stood beside the water carts, fully dressed in the same coat he had worn at the assembly. He showed no sign of having been awakened from sleep. "The Duchess caused this," he declared. "She encouraged the workers to abandon their posts, then burned the warehouse to destroy the evidence against her." Lydia did not answer. 2 watchmen were still trapped inside, and Percival wanted everyone arguing instead of saving them. She pointed toward the broken weighing room window. "Benedict, take 4 men through that passage. The roof above the western aisle is already failing. You have only minutes." For once, he did not challenge her authority. He covered his mouth with a wet cloth and entered with the workers. Lydia remained outside, directing the water line toward the eastern wall to keep their escape route open. Percival approached her. "You give orders as though the key were still yours. The fire does not care who holds the key." A section of roof collapsed with a deafening crack. Several workers cried out, but moments later, Benedict emerged through the window carrying an unconscious watchman. 2 men followed with the second. All 4 rescuers escaped before flames consumed the passage. Benedict lowered the watchman onto the ground. Soot covered his face and coat, but his eyes remained fixed on Percival. "You knew where the fire began," he said. Percival stiffened. "I saw the smoke. You told the men to take water to the rear wall before anyone had opened the warehouse. I made a reasonable judgment." Daniel forced himself upright. He also knew we were inside. Percival turned on him. "You are confused." "You sent us there." Workers closed around them. Lydia saw Percival's hand move toward the pistol beneath his coat. "Search him," she told Benedict. Benedict hesitated. It lasted only a second, but Lydia recognized the old weakness. Even now, He feared the humiliation of discovering that his chosen manager was guilty. Then he held out his hand. "Give me the pistol, Percival." Percival looked at the workers and understood he could not refuse without condemning himself. He surrendered the weapon. By dawn, the fire had been contained. Most of the War Office shipment was ruined, but several crates near the rear wall survived. Lydia cut open one of them. The cloth bore Harrowgate's seal, yet the fibers came apart beneath her fingers. Proper military wool was tightly spun and difficult to tear. This fabric was coarse, weak, and stained her skin with blue dye. Benedict stared at it. Could the fire have damaged it? No, this was inferior before it entered the warehouse. She opened another crate and found the same cloth. Someone replaced the army shipment. Percival's face remained controlled, but he began moving toward the stable yard. Daniel pointed after him. "He is leaving." Benedict turned. Percival ran. Two workers caught him before he reached his horse. As they dragged him back, a metal tag fell from his pocket and struck the stones. Lydia picked it up. One side carried the Harrowgate seal. The other bore the crowned fox of a foreign trading house, and a destination stamped in small letters, Calais. The genuine cloth had not been destroyed. It had been prepared for shipment abroad. Carriage wheels sounded beyond the gates. A dark official coach entered the yard, followed by 4 mounted officers. Sir Matthew Vale, the War Office inspector expected the following morning, stepped down and surveyed the burned warehouse. "My party saw the smoke from the northern road," he said. "What happened here?" Benedict opened his mouth, but Lydia answered first. "Someone substituted inferior cloth for the military shipment and set fire to the warehouse." Sir Matthew examined the false wool and the Calais tag. Then his gaze moved to Percival, held between 2 workers. "Seal the accounts room, the warehouse, and every remaining crate," he ordered. "No document leaves this estate." Benedict stepped toward him. "My wife identified the substitution. She is also the person you accused of falsifying the mill accounts yesterday." Lydia looked sharply at Benedict. "You informed the War Office?" "I requested an examination. You sent the accusation before allowing me to see the evidence." Sir Matthew removed a document case from the coach. "Duke Harrow's letter is not the only evidence requiring an answer." He unfolded a contract authorizing the sale of Harrowgate's military wool through the Calais merchant. The date, seal, and signature were all clearly visible. Lydia read the final line. Unlike the initials in Percival's false ledger, the signature was not an imitation. It was hers. Lydia read the contract twice. The signature was genuine. So was the red wax impressed with her private seal. But the words above them were not. "This was taken from another agreement," she said. Sir Matthew studied her face. "Which agreement?" "A purchase of Spanish merino wool, signed last April. The final page contained only the delivery conditions, my signature, and the seal. Someone removed it and attached it to these false terms." "Where is your copy?" "In my private account book." Percival gave a faint smile. "The same book the Duchess refused to surrender yesterday. I surrendered every record Benedict demanded." "Not that one." Lydia turned to her husband. "Did you search my office after removing me?" Benedict's silence answered her. "I instructed Percival to collect the remaining books," he admitted. "And now the only document capable of proving how my signature was obtained is missing." Benedict looked toward Percival, but the man's expression revealed nothing. Sir Matthew folded the contract carefully. "Until the original is recovered, this remains evidence against you. Then search Percival's office. I already ordered it sealed." "Sealed after the fire," Lydia replied. "He controlled it for nearly 12 hours. Sir Matthew did not argue. His officers searched the accounts room while Lydia examined the surviving crates. Every false length of cloth carried an official Harrowgate stamp, but the seals were slightly deeper on one side. "The marking press was uneven," she said. "Our press does not make that impression." Benedict ran his thumb over the seal. "Then the cloth was marked elsewhere." "Yes, at a working mill with an older press." Mrs. Webb approached with several brass wage tokens in her palm. "Mr. Crane issued these yesterday morning," she said. "He told us half our wages would be paid in tokens until the mill recovered its losses." Sir Matthew examined one. "Could he have ordered these after taking control?" "No," Lydia said. "The date is stamped into the metal. Tokens require a die to be cut, and that takes several days." Percival had prepared them before Benedict publicly appointed him. The missing wages, false accounts, and seizure of the mill were parts of the same plan. Benedict understood it at last. "You knew I would give you the key." Percival met his gaze. "I knew you wanted your mill returned to proper hands." The answer struck more deeply than a denial. Percival had not forced Benedict to distrust his wife. He had simply recognized that Benedict's wounded pride could be guided. One of Sir Matthew's officers returned from the accounts room. "The Duchess's private ledger is gone. We found this beneath Mr. Crane's desk." He handed Sir Matthew a torn sheet from a freight book. It listed 4 wagon loads collected from Harrowgate during the previous month. Each had been described as machinery scrap, but the recorded weight was far too great. The destination had been partly burned away. Only 2 words remained. Greystone House. Lydia knew the name. It was a fulling mill once. It stands beside the Southern Canal. "Who owns it?" Sir Matthew asked. "It belonged to the Harrow family, but Benedict sold it 3 years ago." Benedict frowned. "To a London investment company." Sir Matthew ordered an officer to retrieve the sale records from the estate archive. Meanwhile, Daniel was helped into the room, pale but steady on his feet. "I remembered something," he said. "The night before the fire, I saw 2 wagons leaving through the lower gate. Mr. Crane said they carried damaged machinery." "Did you see the drivers?" Sir Matthew asked. "No, but one wagon lost a strip of blue cloth on the gate." Lydia's attention sharpened. Every 10th length of Harrowgate's military wool contained a single blue thread near the edge, an internal quality mark known only to Lydia, the senior weavers, and the War Office inspector. The genuine shipment had passed through the lower gate. Sir Matthew turned to Percival. "Where were those wagons taken?" Percival said nothing. The estate solicitor arrived with the deed of sale for Greystone House. Sir Matthew opened it on the accounts table. The property had not been purchased directly by a London company. It had been acquired through a trustee whose name Benedict apparently did not recognize. But Lydia did. The final authorization carried the signature of Benedict's younger brother, Lord Edmund Harrow. Benedict stared at it. "My brother told me the company had no connection to our family." "Your brother lied," Lydia said. "And Percival expected you to trust him for the same reason you trusted the false ledger." Sir Matthew ordered his officers to prepare for Greystone House. Then he turned to Benedict. "You will remain here. Until I know how deeply your family is involved, you command no one in this inquiry." For the first time in his life, Benedict Harrow stood inside his own mill without authority. As the officers led Percival away, he glanced back at Lydia. "If you go to Greystone," he said, "you will not find only stolen wool." "What will I find?" Percival smiled. "The reason your husband needed you removed before the War Office opened your books." Sir Matthew allowed Lydia to accompany the search, only because no one else could reliably identify Harrowgate's cloth. She traveled under guard with Mrs. Webb and 6 officers, while Benedict remained at the estate. Greystone House stood beside the abandoned canal, its stone walls dark with soot. From the road, it appeared deserted. Lydia noticed fresh wheel tracks cutting through the mud. Someone left recently. Sir Matthew examined the marks. 2 wagons, perhaps 3. The officers surrounded the building before forcing open a side door. Inside, the old fulling mill was empty, but it had been abandoned in haste. A lantern still burned on a table. Damp coats hung beside the entrance, and scraps of wool covered the floor. At the rear stood a hand-operated marking press. Lydia compared its worn plate with the impression on the false cloth from Harrowgate. This stamped the counterfeit seals. Mrs. Webb opened a storage chest and drew out a folded military blanket. Near its edge ran a single blue thread. "Our cloth," she said. More blankets were hidden beneath the floorboards, wrapped for transport. The labels had already been removed, but Lydia's quality mark remained woven into every 10th length. Sir Matthew ordered his officers to count and seal the recovered goods. "Is this the entire shipment?" he asked. "Less than half," Lydia replied. "The rest has already been moved." An officer discovered a packing list in the stove. Most of it had burned, but 2 entries remained legible. One recorded the delivery of inferior wool to Harrowgate. The other ordered the genuine blankets taken from Greystone to a river warehouse before the end of the week. The instructions bore only the initials E.H. Edmund Harrow, Sir Matthew said. Lydia did not answer immediately. Initials alone would not prove that Benedict's brother had written the order. Edmund could claim they belonged to anyone. Then Mrs. Webb found Lydia's missing private ledger inside a locked cabinet. Several pages had been torn out, including the original wool agreement, but the remaining binding still held a narrow strip of paper where the final page had been cut away. Sir Matthew placed the false contract beside it. The torn edges matched. "This proves your signature was taken from the genuine agreement," he said. "It does not yet prove who altered it, but it weakens the accusation against you." It was the first official acknowledgement of her innocence. Lydia felt no relief. The missing pages could still contain the records needed to explain the stolen wages, and more than half the army shipment remained unaccounted for. A second cabinet contained correspondence between Percival and an unnamed partner in London. The letters discussed reducing wages, manufacturing losses, and provoking Benedict into removing Lydia before the next War Office inspection. One sentence appeared twice. His resentment is stronger than his caution. Sir Matthew read it in silence. They studied your husband, he said. They did not invent his resentment. Near the bottom of the cabinet, Lydia found a sealed envelope addressed to Edmund. Inside was a letter from Benedict, written 4 months earlier. She recognized her husband's hand before reading the first line. Benedict complained that the workers consulted Lydia before him, and that merchants increasingly treated her as the true authority at Harrowgate. Her influence, he wrote, had become an intolerable challenge to his position. Edmund's reply was attached beneath it. Remove her from the mill, and Percival will restore the proper order. I require only your consent. Below those words, Benedict had written a single answer. Agreed. Lydia stared at it until the letters blurred. The false accounts had given Benedict an excuse, but the decision had been made months before Percival opened the ledger. Her husband had not merely failed to protect her from the conspiracy, he had invited it into her place. Sir Matthew brought the recovered cloth, the false contract, and Benedict's letter back to Harrowgate before nightfall. Lydia placed the letter on the accounts table. Benedict recognized it immediately. For several seconds, he said nothing. Around them, the room still carried the smell of smoke from the ruined warehouse. You agreed to remove me 4 months ago, Lydia said. I agreed to let Percival assist with the management. That is not what Edmund proposed. Benedict looked down at his own answer. Agreed. I was angry, he admitted. Merchants wrote to you instead of me. The workers acted as though every decision required your approval. Because I was the one making those decisions. I began to feel unnecessary in my own estate. So you chose someone less capable because he made you feel more powerful. Benedict flinched. Lydia had expected denial. His honesty did not lessen the injury. You praised my work when the mill needed saving, she continued. But once it succeeded, you resented the authority I had earned. I never intended for you to be accused of theft. No, you intended only to strip away my work, my income, and my name before 300 people. He stepped toward her. Lydia, do not ask me to comfort you because the consequences were worse than you expected. Benedict stopped. Sir Matthew entered with a document recovered from Greystone. It named a private company seeking exclusive control of several military textile contracts. Lord Edmund Harrow was one of its principal investors. If Harrowgate failed its inspection, Sir Matthew explained, the company could acquire its contracts and perhaps the mill itself at a fraction of their value. And Benedict's public accusation made the failure appear genuine, Lydia said. Sir Matthew nodded. His letter to the War Office gave Edmund exactly what he needed. Benedict's face went pale. By trying to reclaim authority from his wife, he had nearly delivered the entire estate to his brother. A guard brought Percival into the room. Where are the missing blankets? Sir Matthew demanded. Percival remained silent. And the pages torn from the Duchess's ledger? Still no answer. Mrs. Webb entered behind the guard with a folded paper. A rider left this at the lower gate. The message was addressed to Benedict in Edmund's hand. The remaining blankets and Lydia's missing records would be destroyed unless Benedict publicly withdrew his accusation against Edmund and supported the military contracts bill when it came before Parliament in 2 days. At the bottom, Edmund had added one final line. Refuse, and your wife will remain a thief in the eyes of the crown. Benedict read the message twice. If I support the bill, he returns the evidence. And gains control of every military mill named in it, Lydia said. Thousands of workers would pay for my reputation. I cannot allow you to stand accused because of what I did. Then tell the full truth. His eyes moved toward the letter on the table. If Benedict admitted that he had arranged Lydia's removal months before discovering the false accounts, he would expose his jealousy, destroy his credibility, and possibly lose his parliamentary influence. His enemies would say he had endangered a crown contract to settle a private grievance. But without that confession, Edmund could claim Percival had acted under Lydia's authority. Benedict reached for Edmund's demand. Lydia placed her hand over it. You will not purchase my innocence with other people's livelihoods. What would you have me do? Stand before the workers, the War Office, and Parliament. Tell them why you gave Percival the key. Benedict looked at her. And if it cost me my seat? You were willing to cost me everything. Before he could answer, Percival laughed softly. You still believe this is about one vote. Edmund has supporters inside the inspection office. Even if Benedict confesses, the missing pages will condemn you. Sir Matthew turned sharply. Which official? Percival smiled but refused to answer. Then Lydia noticed a dark indentation beneath his coat cuff, the square impression left by Harrowgate's brass wage tokens. Percival had claimed he never handled the workers' pay himself, yet he had been carrying their tokens, and whatever secret they contained had frightened him enough to hide one against his skin. Sir Matthew ordered Percival searched. A brass wage token was found inside his sleeve. Its number, 417, belonged to no worker currently employed at Harrowgate. Lydia spread the other tokens across the accounts table, while Mrs. Webb brought the previous quarter's wage list. The numbers should follow the order in which workers joined the mill, Lydia said. These do not. They compared the tokens with the names in Percival's false ledger. Every invented worker had been assigned a number above 400. On the reverse of each token was a small fox stamped beneath the Harrowgate crest, the same crowned fox found on the Calais shipping tag. These were not made for our workers, Lydia said. They recorded payments made through the foreign merchant. Sir Matthew examined the false payroll. Percival entered wages under invented names, then used the matching tokens to confirm how much money had been transferred. Mrs. Webb pointed to several scratches along the edge of her token. The women marked them after Mr. Crane refused to give us written statements. One scratch for every unpaid shift. The workers had unknowingly preserved a second record of the stolen wages. Percival's confidence weakened. Sir Matthew placed token 417 before him. If you continue protecting Edmund, every false payment will appear to be yours. Edmund will deny knowing me. He already has, Benedict said. He held out the message demanding support for the military contracts bill. Edmund had described Percival only as a dishonest manager, acting without instruction. Percival read the words slowly. He promised me a share in the company. He intends to give you a prison cell instead, Lydia said. Percival looked toward the guarded door. The missing pages are at the old canal chapel, he finally admitted. An agent will collect them at midnight and take them to London. And the rest of the blankets? Sir Matthew asked. Stored beneath the chapel floor. Edmund means to destroy both if Benedict refuses his terms. Sir Matthew began preparing officers to secure the chapel. Lydia remained beside the accounts table as Benedict asked him to wait. There is something I must do first. He requested paper and wrote a formal statement describing how Edmund had encouraged his resentment of Lydia, how Benedict had agreed to install Percival months before the false accounts appeared, and how he had accused his wife without permitting her to inspect the evidence. He did not call himself deceived. He called himself responsible. When he finished, he signed the statement and handed it to Sir Matthew. Send copies to the War Office and the parliamentary clerk. Sir Matthew read it. This may cost you your committee position, perhaps your seat for the remainder of the session. I understand. Benedict looked at Lydia as though waiting for some change in her expression. She gave him none. A truthful statement is necessary, she said. It is not an apology, and it does not restore what you took. No, he replied, but it ends my part in Edmund's lie. Shortly before midnight, Sir Matthew's officers surrounded the abandoned chapel. Lydia remained with Mrs. Webb behind the stone wall overlooking the canal, while Benedict waited beside Sir Matthew. A covered cart approached without lamps. The driver entered the chapel carrying an empty document case. 2 officers followed and arrested him before he reached the altar. No second guard appeared. Sir Matthew gave the signal. Beneath loose floorboards, they found 13 bundles of genuine Harrowgate blankets and the missing pages from Lydia's ledger, sealed against the damp. The original wool contract was among them. Its final page matched the one attached to the false agreement exactly. Lydia's signature had been stolen. Sir Matthew placed both contracts together. This will clear you of authorizing the sale, not of taking the missing wages, Lydia said. The false payroll still bore her legal seal. The tokens proved how the money had been recorded, but not who had received it. Mrs. Webb opened another bundle and found a packet of letters tied with black cord. Before she could hand it to Lydia, a shot struck the chapel door. The arrested driver twisted free and ran toward the canal. Officers brought him down before he reached the water, but Lydia's attention remained on the packet. One letter had fallen open. It contained a list of payments to Percival, the Calais merchant, and a parliamentary sponsor of Edmund's bill. The last entry was different. It was a payment promised to someone inside the War Office investigation. Beside the amount were the initials, M.V. Lydia looked across the chapel at Sir Matthew Vale. Sir Matthew did not reach for his weapon. Instead, he removed a sealed letter from inside his coat and handed it to Lydia. Edmund offered me that payment 6 weeks ago. The letter promised £2,000 if Sir Matthew declared Harrowgate's blankets defective and recommended the transfer of its military contract to Edmund's company. I reported the offer to my superior, Sir Matthew said. We lacked proof connecting Edmund to the false shipments, so I was instructed to continue the inspection. Lydia compared the amount in Edmund's letter with the entry marked MV. They were identical. But this payment is not marked as completed, she said. The entries beside Percival and the Calais merchant bore small crosses. The payment beside Sir Matthew's initials bore an open circle. Offered, but not accepted, she concluded. Sir Matthew nodded. That is why I arrived prepared to examine more than the quality of your wool. By morning, the recovered documents had been returned to Harrowgate under guard. Lydia arranged the evidence in the accounts room while Mrs. Webb matched the wage tokens with the unpaid shifts recorded by the workers. Together, the records revealed a simple scheme. Percival had invented workers and entered wages under their names. The money was then transferred, as supposed freight and repair expenses, to the Calais merchant. In return, the merchant supplied inferior wool and prepared to sell Harrowgate's genuine blankets abroad. Edmund's company would use the failed contract to demand Harrowgate's removal from the War Office list. What the papers did not contain was a direct order from Edmund to replace the cloth. Sir Matthew questioned Percival again. If you testify, he said, your cooperation will be recorded. If you refuse, Edmund's letters will allow him to claim you designed everything. Percival looked toward Benedict. You gave me the key. I did, Benedict replied. And I will say so publicly. You wanted her gone. I did. Percival had expected Benedict to protect himself. The admission left him with nowhere to place the blame. At last, he confessed that Edmund had financed the counterfeit tokens, arranged the foreign merchant, and ordered the warehouse burned when Lydia identified the false ink. Percival had locked the watchman inside because Daniel had seen the genuine blankets being removed. Mrs. Webb's face tightened with fury. You were willing to kill 3 men to protect a contract. Percival lowered his eyes. Sir Matthew recorded every word, then required Percival to sign each page before 2 witnesses. The War Office will hold a public inquiry here tomorrow, he announced. The workers were accused before one another. They are entitled to hear the correction in the same place. Lydia looked at Benedict. He understood that Sir Matthew was giving him no private escape from what he had done. That afternoon, the workers returned, not to restart the looms, but to prepare the spinning hall for the inquiry. The false ledger, original contract, wage tokens, blue thread blankets, and Benedict's sworn statement were placed under guard. Near sunset, a carriage bearing the Harrow crest entered the yard. Edmund stepped down with Lord Fenton, the parliamentary sponsor of the Military Contracts Bill, and 2 solicitors. He showed no concern at seeing Sir Matthew's officers. I have come to answer my brother's extraordinary accusations, he said. Sir Matthew informed him that Percival had confessed. Edmund smiled. A frightened criminal will say anything to reduce his punishment. The recovered correspondence also names you, Lydia said. It contains initials, assumptions, and documents discovered by a woman accused of fraud. The original contract proves my signature was stolen. It proves only that 2 contracts carry the same final page. Edmund then handed Sir Matthew a sealed packet. Inside was a written authorization signed by Benedict 4 months earlier. It granted Edmund permission to negotiate with investors, merchants, and government officials on behalf of the Harrow estates. The signature was genuine. Benedict stared at it. You told me it concerned the sale of Greystone. The language grants broader authority. You concealed that from me. I gave you a document, Edmund replied. You chose not to read it. The same carelessness Benedict had used against Lydia now protected his brother. Edmund turned toward the silent looms. At tomorrow's inquiry, Percival will be exposed as a thief, my brother as a negligent fool, and the Duchess as the woman whose seal appears on every missing payment. Then he looked directly at Lydia. And unless you can prove where the stolen wages went, the War Office will still have no lawful reason to clear your name. The War Office inquiry began the following morning in the same spinning hall where Benedict had taken the key from Lydia. The workers stood beside the silent looms. Sir Matthew sat at the accounts table with 2 commissioners sent to review the military contract. Edmund and Lord Fenton occupied one side of the hall. Lydia and Benedict stood on the other. Edmund's solicitor presented the authorization first. The Duke permitted Lord Edmund to negotiate with merchants, investors, and government officials on behalf of the Harrow estates. Nothing proves that he ordered the substitution of military cloth, Sir Matthew called Percival. Percival described the false payroll, the Calais merchant, and Edmund's plan to ruin Harrowgate. Edmund listened without visible concern. "This man set fire to a warehouse and locked workers inside," he said when Percival finished. His testimony is an attempt to save himself. It was an effective objection. Percival's confession required support from independent evidence. Lydia presented the original wool contract beside the false one. The torn edges matched, proving that her genuine signature had been attached to substituted terms. She then showed the commissioners the blue thread blankets recovered from Greystone and the weaker cloth placed in Harrowgate's crates. The counterfeit cloth carried a seal made by the press at Greystone, she explained. The genuine shipment was found beneath a building controlled through Lord Edmund's company. "Controlled under my brother's authorization," Edmund replied. Every defense returned to Benedict's careless signature. Then Benedict stepped forward. "The authorization does not excuse my brother," he said, "but it does prove my own negligence." He placed his sworn statement before the commissioners. "I agreed to remove my wife from the mill before any evidence of fraud existed. I resented that the workers trusted her judgment more than mine. Edmund recognized that resentment and offered me a manager who would return authority to my hands." A murmur passed through the hall. Benedict continued. "When Percival later produced the false ledger, I refused to let Lydia examine it because I feared being contradicted before the workers. I wrote to the War Office before verifying a single entry. The public accusation against my wife was mine, not Edmund's and not Percival's." Lydia watched him surrender the excuse that would have protected his reputation. Lord Fenton rose. "The Duke's marital failings are irrelevant to the missing crown funds." "They are not irrelevant," Benedict said. "My actions gave Percival access to Lydia's records, seal, and office. I created the opportunity this conspiracy required." One commissioner warned that Benedict's admission could lead to his removal from the parliamentary committee overseeing military supply. "I understand." He did not look at Lydia for forgiveness. "Oh!" Sir Matthew presented Edmund's attempted bribe and the corresponding unpaid entry in the recovered payment list. The amount, date, and initials matched. Edmund's solicitor argued that anyone could have copied the information from the letter. The commissioners remained divided. Lydia turned to the wage tokens. Each false worker had received a token numbered above 400. Those numbers matched entries in the Calais merchant's freight list. Token 417, found hidden in Percival's sleeve, corresponded to a crate of genuine military cloth removed on the night before the fire. The false wages were not wages at all, Lydia explained. They were a concealed inventory of stolen blankets. Mrs. Webb then presented the workers' scratched tokens and the unpaid shifts they represented. Together, the two sets of records proved that Percival reduced real wages while entering payments to people who did not exist. "But whose account received the money?" Edmund asked. That remained the missing link. Sir Matthew placed the transfer orders on the table. Each carried an impression of Lydia's legal seal. Edmund faced the commissioners. The Duchess's signature was transferred once. Her seal appears on 12 separate payments. Are we expected to believe every document bearing her authority was forged? Lydia examined the impressions under the light. For the first time, she noticed that every seal was identical, not merely in design, but in the position of tiny scratches and a crescent-shaped stain near the border. A genuine wax impression changed slightly with every use. Pressure shifted. Wax spread unevenly. Small marks did not repeat in precisely the same position. These 12 impressions had not been made separately. They had been copied from one original document and printed onto the transfer orders. Lydia asked Sir Matthew to bring the false contract. At its bottom sat the same crescent-shaped stain. The signature and seal came from the same stolen page, she said. Percival did not possess 12 orders authorized by me. He possessed one genuine contract and reproduced its final page. Edmund's composure finally weakened. Lydia placed the contracts, transfers, and wage tokens in a single line before the commissioners. "The forged documents show how my authority was stolen," she said. "The tokens show where the money was concealed, and the merchant's list identifies what each payment purchased." She turned over the final sheet. On its reverse was an overlooked receipt for the numbered crates, written in the same hand as Edmund's demand to Benedict. Beneath the total appeared a complete signature, Edmund Harrow. Edmund examined the receipt without touching it. "A signature proves that I acknowledged a shipment," he said. "It does not prove I knew the blankets were stolen." "Then perhaps Mr. Crane can explain what you acknowledged," Sir Matthew replied. Percival was recalled. He identified the receipt as the document Edmund signed after inspecting the genuine Harrowgate blankets at Greystone. Edmund had ordered him to remove Lydia's quality marks where possible, replace the cloth with inferior wool, and record the stolen crates as wages paid to invented workers. Edmund's solicitor objected that Percival was protecting himself. Lydia answered before Sir Matthew could. Then disregard his testimony and follow the records. She arranged the evidence in order. The false ledger contained entries written with ink delivered months after their supposed dates. The false contract had been assembled from pages cut out of her private account book. The copied seal on the transfer orders came from that same stolen page. The wage token numbers matched the crates listed by the Calais merchant. The blankets bearing Lydia's hidden blue thread were recovered from Greystone, a property controlled through Edmund's company. Finally, Edmund's signed receipt confirmed that he had inspected those numbered crates. No single document told the whole story. Together, they left no reasonable alternative. The senior commissioner looked toward Edmund. Your authorization allowed negotiation on behalf of Harrowgate. It did not permit theft, falsification of military records, bribery, or arson. Lord Fenton rose and tried to distance himself from the company, but Sir Matthew produced Edmund's payment list. Beside Fenton's name stood a completed payment corresponding to the date he introduced the military contracts bill. The local magistrate, who had attended the inquiry at Sir Matthew's request, ordered Edmund detained pending formal charges. Lord Fenton was forbidden to leave the county until his financial records could be examined. Edmund's composure finally broke. He turned on Benedict. You wrote the accusation. You gave me authority. You placed Percival in the mill. Yes, Benedict said, and I have admitted each choice. You will lose your position with me. I should. Edmund was led from the hall without another word. The commissioners then delivered their findings. The evidence showed that Lydia had neither authorized the sale of military wool nor received the missing wages. Her signature and seal had been taken from a legitimate contract and reproduced on false documents. The accusation against her was formally withdrawn. Harrowgate's military contract would remain in force under temporary supervision until the mill's management was legally reorganized. The workers' withheld wages were to be restored from the seized company funds, and, if those proved insufficient, from the Harrow estate. No one applauded at first. Then Daniel Holt began striking his palm against the wooden rail. Mrs. Webb joined him. Within seconds, the spinning hall filled with applause, not for Benedict, the commissioners, or the crown, but for the woman who had been condemned in that same place. Lydia stood beneath the overseer's clock and allowed herself one steady breath. Her name had been restored. Her marriage had not. Benedict stepped before the workers with the iron master key in his hand. I took this from my wife because I valued obedience more than judgment, he said. I accused her without proof and gave her authority to a man whose only qualification was agreeing with me. He placed the key on the table before Lydia. The mill is yours to command. Lydia looked at it but did not reach for it. You took my authority with one public declaration, she said. If I accept it from your hand today, you could take it again tomorrow. Benedict's face tightened, but he did not argue. What do you require? An independent operating trust. My management authority must be protected by my marriage settlement and supervised by trustees who do not answer solely to you. The workers must also be permitted to report fraud without dismissal. Every face turned toward the Duke. Such an agreement would prevent Benedict and any future heir from controlling the mill through personal command alone. It would return more than a key. It would surrender power. Benedict looked across the hall at the workers whose livelihoods his pride had endangered. Then he faced Lydia. I will sign it. That will protect the mill, she said. It will not decide what happens to our marriage. I understand. Do you? Lydia finally picked up the iron key. When the trust is executed and every worker has been repaid, I will leave Harrow Hall. I will live at the Dower House under a separate household and income. Benedict went still. She held his gaze. After that, whether you have any place in my life will be mine alone to decide. The Harrowgate Operating Trust was executed 3 weeks later. Lydia received sole authority over production, contracts, and employment. 3 trustees, a settlement representative, an independent accountant, and a member elected by the senior workers, were required to approve any attempt to remove her. Benedict could no longer take the mill from her with a command. He restored Lydia's withheld allowance from his private funds and sold his London residence to cover the unpaid wages, rebuild the warehouse, and reopen the schoolroom and infirmary. He did not call these acts generosity. They were repayment. The parliamentary committee suspended him for the remainder of the session, after reviewing his confession. Benedict accepted the decision without using his title or influence to resist it. Months passed before the criminal proceedings concluded. The records from Greystone, Percival's testimony, Edmund's signed receipt, and the attempted bribes established the full conspiracy. Edmund had intended to make Harrowgate fail its military contract, purchase the weakened mill through his company, and secure favorable government contracts through Lord Fenton's bill. Edmund was convicted of fraud, bribery, theft, and conspiracy to destroy crown property. His company assets were seized to compensate Harrowgate and the other mills he had targeted. Percival received a reduced sentence for cooperating, but forfeited his investment and was permanently barred from managing an estate or factory. Lord Fenton resigned his public positions before facing prosecution for accepting bribes. Lydia's innocence was recorded formally in the War Office findings. Harrowgate's military contract was renewed under her independent management, but Lydia did not return to Benedict's rooms. She moved into the dower house with her own servants, income, and correspondence. Benedict accepted the separation without asking how long it would last. On her final evening at Harrow Hall, he met her beside the carriage. "I once believed admitting I was deceived would be enough," he said. "You were deceived," Lydia replied. "But Edmund did not create your resentment." "No, he only found it useful." Benedict looked toward the mill. "I loved being praised for marrying an intelligent woman. I did not love what happened when others trusted her judgment more than mine. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her." "That realization may make you a better man," Lydia said. "It does not require me to remain your wife in every way that I was before. I understand." This time, she believed he was beginning to. Over the following year, Benedict repaired tenant cottages, attended mill meetings only when invited, and answered questions from the workers without reminding them of his rank. When Lydia disagreed with him, he did not treat disagreement as disobedience. He never asked Mrs. Webb to praise his improvement. He never asked Lydia to reward it. Under Lydia's management, Harrowgate recovered. Wages increased, the infirmary hired a permanent nurse, and apprentices spent 2 mornings each week in the schoolroom. The workers also gained a protected method for reporting unsafe conditions and dishonest accounts. 1 year after the fire, Benedict visited the mill. Lydia received him in the accounts room rather than her private home. "I have been offered a return to the parliamentary committee," he said. "Will you accept?" "Only if I am permitted to introduce the proposal you drafted." The proposal required military contractors to keep verifiable wage records and protected workers who reported fraud. It would make Edmund's scheme harder to repeat elsewhere. "You may introduce it," Lydia said. Benedict nodded. "May I visit you next Sunday?" She studied him. He had repaired what could be repaired with money, testimony, and relinquished authority. What remained between them could not be settled by a court or written into a trust. Allowing him to speak was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was simply a choice she was now free to make. "Come at 3, she said. "We will walk in the garden." A faint hope crossed his face, but he did not mistake it for a promise. "Thank you." After he left, Lydia entered the spinning hall. The workers waited beside the repaired looms. Mrs. Webb stood near the main control box, while Daniel, fully recovered from the warehouse fire, held the new production ledger. Lydia removed the Iron Master key from her waist. It was the same key Benedict had taken from her before 300 witnesses, but now her authority did not depend upon his affection, his pride, or his permission. She fitted the key into the control box. No man reached for it. Lydia turned it. The first row of looms began to move, then the second. The sound traveled across the hall until hundreds of machines thundered together beneath her command. And this time, Harrowgate knew exactly whose judgment had saved it.